Back in my YouTube atheism days, I made a 42-part video series called Why Do Intelligent People Still Believe in Religion? It's one of my top viewed series, and one I'm most proud of. You can watch the whole playlist in the show notes. It delves into the psychology of what makes it so hard for very intelligent people to question or critically analyze their faith, even when presented with facts and evidence that contradict what they believe. In fact, because my fellow atheist YouTubers, who went on to be anti-SJW shitlords, were so keen on calling all religious people stupid and retarded, the first video in this playlist is called Religious People Are Not Drooling Idiots. Millennial and Zoomer leftists can often be some of the most obnoxious and 100% certain of themselves. They are most likely to be part of the new angry, newly woke people who just recently realized shit is fucked up and why hasn't it been fixed yet. So they use shock and fear tactics and lots of anger, mostly on social media. That anger is well founded, however it's not actually going to change a goddamn thing. You see, they don't seem to understand that the human brain essentially has a phobia against new complex ideas, especially in older people. In most animals, their baby and adolescent stage is short, and their brain quickly loses plasticity once they reach adulthood. When we domesticated animals, we actually neotenized them, which means we selected for traits that extend their baby and adolescent traits longer. That is why you can train a dog, but it's super hard to train a wolf. A dog's brain's plasticity is extended much longer than that of a wolf's, so you can, with a lot of time and patience, still teach an old dog new tricks. It's just almost as difficult as teaching a young adult wolf new tricks. Scientists now consider humans as having domesticated themselves, as increased brain plasticity boosted our evolutionary advantages, and we have a lot more genetic traits that were only associated with babies in early humans and now extend throughout our adult life. However, humans also live much longer than most animals because elderly people are still evolutionarily useful in terms of childcare and being a bank of tribal knowledge, and used to be the most well-informed people in the area. It's why traditionally, they would be the ones people would defer to, sometimes religiously and blindly because they knew the most of everyone. But with that longer life, the brain becomes less and less plastic with age. Add a trauma like PTSD to it, like say many older veterans and African Americans in general from systematic racism and Jim Crow, and that plasticity is reduced even further. They are also much more risk-averse, something common in young members of a species and less of an older member of a species. That is how we as humans evolved. Young people want to try new things that will help the tribe or society adapt to a new environment and take risks to make it happen, while older people are a bank of collected knowledge from their lifetime with reduced plasticity, which helps them hang on to this knowledge and are therefore risk-averse. In times of normal information flow, this works great. Just as evolution is a slow, gradual shift from generation to generation, the collective accepted ideas of a culture also slowly shifted from generation to generation. This change is gradual as young people want to try and take risks with new ideas and act as an accelerator, but older people act as the brake to mitigate the potential negative risks that can be caused. However, in complex times like this century, that has actually gone worse and worse, as our elderly are dealing with PTSD and pollution poisoning, which our young people don't have, and information is flooding us daily, which our young people on average grew up with, but our elderly did not, so they can't consume information as fast and are likely to get information from places that tells them what they were taught growing up instead of getting information from many, many different sources. As a young person, I started out as a religious right Republican, shifted to a Democrat, shifted again to a Ron Paul libertarian, shifted to progressive, and then am slowly and deliberately drifting further and further left, certainly on board with mutualism, but only when I can understand and explain mechanisms to others without serious flaws that can be seen. As someone who jumped around and swallowed ideologies whole hog because they made sense, but were missing key pieces I was unaware of at the time, I am much less Gnostic and more agnostic with a lot of complex gray area on topics than I was when I was a younger person. I know just how easily it is to fall into an ideology and worldview that is oversimplified, and any ideology that can neatly explain the world is one that you should take with a very big grain of salt, and that includes both libertarianism and forms of extreme leftism. If you can't explain your ideology to everyone and properly defend it from criticism without getting mad and frustrated, then you don't properly understand it yourself and are just going on the bandwagon effect and the need for closure and certainty. The constant jumping over my lifetime is also why my mother is much less likely to trust anything I have to say, because I just appear to be a leaf in the breeze as new ideas and information present themselves, even though as a scientist, that is what you're supposed to do. Go where the evidence takes you and not stick to an ideology no matter what. To her, my ideology just looks like the new fad flavor I'm into at the moment, a phase I'm going through that will change in a few years, so just ignore it. The system of old people having most of the knowledge and being deferred to for the most part worked great for most of humanity, but as we systematized science, there became a division of knowledge that arose, and we began to rely on experts in a field over someone who just happened to be elderly nearby on specific topics. Old people stopped being the all-knowing, all-wise jack-of-all-trade knowledge banks that their parents and grandparents were, and lost a ton of power they always assumed they would have when they reached that age. Loss of power always increases drifting toward conspiracy theory thinking, especially if you're science and evidence illiterate, as most of them are, just thanks to it never being taught in our schools. We now have instant access to elders that are very specialized in a field, or as we call them, experts or academic elites, and no longer go to our elders for that. Old people also suffer from the Golden Age syndrome bias, where the brain focuses on current bad problems so we can be aware of them, but forgets them over time to reduce things like depression, and more strongly remembers the good times in the past, so the present often feels way worse than the past. Also, your past is when you knew less about the world, so your memories of that time are way more simple, so the past feels good while the present feels bad, even though statistically this is the best time in human history to be alive. Therefore, while young people want progress and to move forward, scared older, deplasticized people want to fight equally hard to go back to an idealistic past that never actually was. New angries want to use shock and anger because they think it will wake people up into action because they're scared and angry, and rightfully so, and it caused them to act. However, the human brain doesn't work like that. Shock only works on like 10% of the time, as phobia therapy data shows, while 90% of the time it requires gradual, slow changes that make you feel safe to play around with new ideas, as the human brain has a natural phobia to new ideas, especially in older people, whose brains have lost much of that plasticity. Much of my change was from humor, music, or fiction, allowing my pleasure centers to be activated and toy around with ideas that were just hypothetical until they clicked into place and I realized they were better than the belief I currently had. The new angries may be 100% correct, but they're walking upstream against a very natural current and can't accept that change is gradual, even though it is literally changing faster than ever before, as new ideas are spread faster and faster. In 2000, the majority of Americans, including myself, viewed gays and atheists as evil and untrustworthy. 20 years later, only a large minority of socially viewed bigoted assholes think that way. In 2000, weed was viewed as a bad drug and should never be made legal. Now, most states are either decriminalizing it or completely legalizing it and considering the same for other drugs. This is an amazing and radical transformation over just a 20-year period that used to take 30 to 50 years back in the day, and is cranking up faster. I hear young people criticizing the lack of mail-in voting as ableist and made to help the establishment win. However, states and parties are slowly switching to mail-in faster than I've ever seen. I just moved to Pennsylvania in 2018, where they just enacted mail-in for the first time for primary and general elections. I believe Virginia is working on one as well now that they're swinging blue. This has been an uphill battle, and you can't just change the system and rules mid-election unless there's something like COVID-19, and hopefully it will push most states to become mail-in once people understand it's a thing and understand it's safe and fair, and they like it. I didn't even know mail-in was a thing until maybe 3 to 4 years ago, and I didn't know the data on how and why it was safe and secure, which is why 4 primaries using ranked choice voting in Maine and New York City are opening up the idea to more states once more people know about and understand it. Now it's on the ballot in Massachusetts and I believe Alaska for this year. Parties are big ships full of many people, and that takes quite a while to turn around, but they are finally turning, or at least the Democratic Party is. Change is slow because a lot of people have to get educated and get on board to change things. If there is a big financial organization that can propagandize using framing, this simplifies things for older people using language and logic shortcuts they were wired to have in their younger days. They can essentially be grifted into believing some pretty bad ideas, especially if they perceive themselves to have lost a significant amount of power. If you're relying on mostly anger, shock, bitterness, and judgmentalism, like many of the new angry, you're helping educate about 10% of the time, but helping the enemy 90% of the time, according to phobia studies, as humans have a natural phobia to new knowledge, as paradigm shifts are rough on the brain, and according to psychology, just makes them dig in even further, especially older people. Psychologists say that being kind and being there for them without enabling is the only real way to help people locked in a cult, an abusive relationship, or a scam, and making sure they have a way out and a social circle willing to accept them. What most of the new angry are doing is exactly the opposite of that, even though it feels right. Similar to the belief that spanking works because it feels like if you put force into it, it should work, even though it's actually counterproductive long term. Either way, people collectively have to agree on it. Even if we had a completely fair democratic democracy, this would always be true. If you go against the majority will and have a small section of the population force their morality and beliefs on the rest of the nation, that is a form of tyranny, which we currently have with winner-take-all, disproportionate Senate representation, and gerrymandering, but we have to work our asses off to fix those things, as we can do it. History has a long precedent for this, and our connectedness is changing things faster than ever. We just have to keep working at it thanklessly, and not expect things to change, and not get pissed when they don't, unless that drives you to action to change. However, what I see in so many young people is that anger drives them to not participate at all, or give up entirely, and that just ensures change will never come. Millennials and younger, shit's fucked up, and it was even worse in the past. We need to change now and move forward to get a new future. The problem is right and liberals. I complain about it on social media loudly and demand immediate change and don't understand how voting changes anything, so I don't vote. Boomers and older, shit's fucked up. We need to go back to a time when America was great. We need to stop this change now. The problem is left and liberals. I don't know how to use social media, but I always turn out to vote, like I do church. This is exactly what Hillary meant when she said she thinks gradual change is the only way forward. Thanks to Congress having a 90% retention rate, changing the government's going to take either a lot of time or a lot of hard work. Literally two sides of America with nearly equal size of demographics wanting completely opposite things. One growing in voting power as they mature, one declining, but they have also secured gerrymandering, voter suppression, and other methods to hold on to power, and they actually get out to vote while the young people don't. So we need to win by a landslide to break even until the demographic shifts. Until then, gradual change is the political reality, whether we like it or not, or can even afford it. So thank you so much for joining me on my podcast. I'm sure there was nothing controversial about this, and everyone will happily get along in the comments section, which you can do on the YouTube version of this video, or my Facebook page, After School Democracy. Link in the show notes. Just a reminder that I'm Anubis2814 on YouTube, and I have over 500 videos on different topics that I've made over the past 10 years. Please subscribe, and if your podcast site has the option, give me a like or review. If you think what I have to say informed you, consider supporting my Patreon. I'll be doing this podcast weekly and try to get it out on the same day, so I hope to see you here next week, ready to be filled with new ideas. Take care. This channel is helped tremendously by the generous supporters on Patreon. A big thank you to the wonderful Joe Taylor, Elias Garcia Guevara, and Ogrel for their support at the $10 a month Wapawet level. Please consider donating to my work if you can, and thank you all for listening.